Everybody, and welcome back to another Stoneforge gaming video. And today we're going to be taking a look at several assorted monsters for RPGs mostly, if I'm being honest. I'm not necessarily worried too much about these for war games, although you could use them for war games if you wanted to use them as specific monsters, or actually this Undead Wolf I am going to be using as the Undead Dog for my Kings of War zombies or skeletons unit, so that which those of you who are familiar with Kings of War, you'll know that you can put like zombie dogs or undead dogs into various different units and make them regenerate faster. Basically, they're bringing back the bones of the dead and all that sort of stuff. So, so some of them will be getting used in war games. Like say this werewolf might as well. I'm not really sure, but mostly they're for RPGs. So we've got here a mimic, a undead dog slash wolf, I'm not really sure if I would call this a were-turtle or if it would just be like a turtle man, not really sure. And then you have a werewolf here, just kind of standard werewolf. And they've all been painted up in various different forms, but a lot of them have used similar techniques, especially you'll see each one of these actually has, I've been working on some of my like various different satin or gloss looks that I wanted to, because I've obviously done a lot of blood effects and things like that in the past, but for some of these, like for instance for this were-turtle dude, I wanted him to really look like he just kind of got up out of a swamp, so I didn't want to do necessarily something that was just straight up the same way that I do my blood, just swap out the green or the red for the green, but I want to try a couple of different things. And then the mimic was pretty interesting. Now these two here on the ends, the werewolf and the mimic, are from the Deep Cuts WizKids line, and then these two here are from Reaper. They're the Reaper Bones line. I believe it was Kickstarter 2 or 3, something along those lines. If you're familiar with that particular line, you know there's a million different models that they came out with. But anyways, so we'll take a look at them over at the table and take a closer look at some of the details and the way that I painted them up. Alright, so we have here these 4 models, and what we're going to do is just kind of take you through the process of how I painted them up. Each one of them took a little bit of a different approach with them, just to try to do some new things. So we're going to start off with this one, which is the Mimic model. Now, as this is a very interesting model, as basically it is, again, this is one of the Deep Cuts miniatures, and it was pretty interesting to paint because in many factors it really could have been just as simple as painting a piece of terrain, so like how you would just paint up like a regular chest, but I decided to kind of take a different route with it maybe. So I painted it up, did some dry brushing, did some layers on it, did a couple of layers of metallics to give it that kind of rusted or just kind of brass, dear Lord, look to it. And then the eyes here, basically what I wanted to do is I almost wanted to make a transition to where around the front and then basically towards the mouth, I wanted it to kind of make that transition from the wood colors and the metal colors into the teeth and the mouth and the eyes and all that sort of stuff, to make it look like a gradual transition. So up at the top here you've got these, like, I'm not really sure what these knotty bits are. They're like these little nodules that kind of come off the top. They almost look like little bits of bone, so that's kind of what I painted them up as. And then the teeth here, I did it basically just regular base wash, and I believe it was 2 layers of highlights, one with like a khaki color and one with a straight up white. And then for the eyes, what I actually did was I painted the inside of it gold for each one of the eyes, and then I did a slight wash of, I believe it was a Reikland Fleshade or some wash like that, and then I dotted the pupils as silver. So it's a little hard to tell here, but you can see the basically the silver that is done on there. And so I use the silver almost as if it was another form of, I don't know, protection from the thing, to make you like it maybe like in its untransformed form, it would kind of look like maybe there was a couple of pieces of gold resting on top of the chest to maybe trick an adventurer to stick out their hand and get chomped on. And then the tongue here, I did a little bit of wet blending on here just to kind of get that gradient on there. And then I did a layer of dry brushing, and then I did a little bit of, I believe, actually I have it right here. It was the Spirit Stone Red, the technical paint from GW. I used that as almost like I mixed that with a little bit of a glaze medium, and then basically turn that into basically a glossy sort of finish for this tongue to really kind of make it look like that slobbery kind of look to it, so you can see the way that the light is reflecting off of it. So the next model I did a little bit differently, and this is basically this undead wolf. And what I did here, I'm going to be using this for Kings of War, but also for Pathfinder RPGs, whatever. What I really wanted to do with this one is, this was a model I did with an idea in mind that I wanted to see how quickly I could finish a model like this to a decent standard. So what I did was I gave myself an hour. And basically at the end of that hour from, now that didn't include like putting it together, cleaning off the extra bits and stuff like that, but this was literally just basically once it was primed, I wanted to see what, that did include doing the base, doing all the flocking and all that sort of stuff, and finishing all that up. So I wanted to see what I could do within a 1 hour's time. So what I did was I kind of did a little bit of a wet blend between the brown on the bottom here and the gray on the top, and then I just dry brushed those two basically with a higher up brown, and I started with a black on the whole thing, and then basically dry brushed the bottom bits in brown, did a little more dry brushing up towards the middle to kind of transition those colors and to make it look more natural. And then basically I did the same thing with the fur. I picked out the basically the toenails in white, and then what I did was I painted in all of these little spots here with a really quick flesh tone or pure white for the skeleton parts. And then what I did was I basically went around the outsides of those with my mix of, basically, if you guys have seen my video on how I make my own blood effects paint, that's how I did that. But what I did was I did it kind of all around, so it looked like you could still see the meat or the bone or the whatever there was kind of showing through. And I did the same around the eyes to make them look like they were kind of rotted or maggot eaten or something like that. Just wanted to make it look really, really gross. That's one of my issues with a lot of people's monsters, is they don't really look monstrous enough, in my opinion. They're not scary enough. So, and again, imagine if you saw this kind of lumbering out of a dark alley. So kind of interesting. But so very, very different technique, very different style of approaching a miniature like that. Now this was a model, this werewolf here, it's one of the two that came in the Deep Cuts miniatures pack. And what I did was I decided to do a couple of things. I airbrushed the whole thing, kind of a basic brown. And then what I wanted to do was, basically in a similar way to this wolf here, I wanted to do kind of a transition between these more what look like flesh bits, like the fleshy skin tone, and then basically the fur, where you can see that fur kind of around the forearms and then the back and then the head. And so what I did here, instead of doing more of the dry brushing as my highlights, I did after the wet blending, I did a little bit of dry brushing on basically the fur, and then for the skin tones, I did a couple of layers with basically some khakis just to kind of pick out those highlights, and then basically did the similar thing for all the clothes here, basically the tattered loincloth, is I went in, painted that up with the idea that basically I just wanted it to look kind of ratty and kind of sweaty and soaked and everything like that. And then I used the same sort of blood effect to finish off the claws and then around the mouth here. So all in all, it was a pretty quick paint job. And this model here was actually very similar in that I kind of gave myself kind of a time limit on it. And what I did was I went through, did a similar thing, but I painted it up with several. Basically, I did almost all layering on the shell and everything like that. It was kind of a mix of layering and wet blending, but and a little bit of dry brushing at the beginning just to kind of pick out the original details. And then what I did was I went in after that as I had my two kind of, you have your skin toned, and then you had your basically your shells, which I kind of painted all in the same, basically two different tones of green. So you've got your more drab olive color for the what would be considered like the skin, and then you've got your basically your hard shell here, and then you've got the basically the wooden club. And so what I did was actually in between, so you can actually see the gloss here is actually not coming from the outer parts. You can actually see that it is actually coming from the recesses. And how I did that was I used it as almost a basically a line. So I would paint in a line of this mixture of this kind of swampy gloss paint that basically this mixture that I came up with, and used it all over the flesh because I wanted the flesh to kind of look wet and still kind of soaked. Like if you ever picked up a turtle, they kind of always look wet regardless of their situation. But then on top of that, I wanted the shell to look a little more, I don't know, just like say they're like where there's spots of dried on the very tips, like maybe he's been out of the water for a little bit, and the recesses are still wet, but basically the interior of or the exterior bits, like the little points and things like that, are a little more dried off. So all in all, these were a couple of interesting models. I really enjoyed painting the four of them rather. And I enjoyed kind of doing just eclectic. Sometimes I just enjoy eclectic monster painting. It's one of my favorite things to do, is just to paint up random monsters and kind of go to town on them. So I hope you've all enjoyed this Stoneforge Gaming video, and I will see you in the next one.